Our next speaker is Daniel Owes from the Assistant Director of Operations Clinical St John, New Zealand. Daniel has quite a history behind him. I remember I just read something that on a website that he at 3:15 in the morning was woken early to attend an emergency as a fire medical first responder. I thought, well, hang on, he's not a fire medical, he's an ambulance. Turns out he's not only a paid employee of St John's, he's a volunteer as well. Like many St John's people, he also volunteers more widely in his community, 16 years with the local fire brigade. And just amongst other things, in April last year, he was admitted as a member to the most venerable order of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem. So Daniel is going to speak to us about innovations in learning media. Please welcome Daniel.
Afternoon all. So firstly, let me just say that my highly competitive nature means that I am completely delighted for Ambulance Victoria in cleaning up last night. I certainly wish them well next year, and I'm hearing that there's a bit of motivation amongst some of our allied ambulance services to do well next year, and we certainly intend to be up there, so that's pretty cool. The next little bit that we'll be talking about, so I'm an ICP from Christchurch, and my current role is head of the clinical team for St John, and this next presentation is taking you through what we are currently doing with some of our learning. So St John New Zealand has about 4,500 clinical personnel, 1,200 of them are paid, and the balance of them are volunteers, and we service an area except for Metropolitan Wellington and Wairarapa, so we're about 90% of the New Zealand geographical area in terms of emergency ambulance, and it's quite challenging to deliver good messaging, consistent messaging out there to people, volunteers when they're in both metropolitan, rural and remote communities. So initially what I'm going to take you through is what we're doing right now, and then I'm going to share some of the initiatives that we're putting in place, and maybe that might spark some interest from you in terms of wanting to come talk to us about how you might do that, or perhaps you might have some ideas for us moving forward. So that's sort of the idea there. So from our perspective, we have a clinical periodical called Clinical Focus, so it's something that we put out there with best endeavours every quarter, and the purpose of that is basically a clinical magazine where people can write in and submit information, clinical things which they have seen out there. It's a mechanism for us to get good clinical messaging out to the troops, and what we try and do is make it the sort of magazine that you can literally have on the coffee table so that you can read it and just in your downtime. So it's not a mechanism for sort of putting critical messages that you want out there today, but it's a sort of thing which is very good for leaving on a coffee table and having out there so that people can read it in their own time. Obviously we've got things like our cardiac arrest registry. The team does very well with some of the pictures and things that they put in there, and we're looking forward to hopefully beating last year's ROSC rate, no pressure Bridget, so 29% ROSC rate for us last year and 16% survival at hospital discharge. Just some video examples of what we've been up to. So I'm Dan Owes, I'm part of the St John clinical team. I'm here with Dr Tony Smith, our medical director, and we're going to discuss spinal cord injury. Now clearly in a country the size of New Zealand, while it's nowhere near the size of Australia, it's hard to get the medical director in front of everyone. So now we sit them on a couch, we have a general chat with them about questions that are being asked of us and clinical issues, and we pop that up onto our wiki, which is available via our app. Really effective mechanism for us.
Giving adrenaline IV can produce lethal dysrhythmias in the heart. But if given IM, it is safer and works a little slower, so it is less likely to produce unwanted adverse effects. You can see here in this diagram how when we give a drug, it takes time to get to its peak effect. If you give too much of a drug, it goes beyond this and can reach an unacceptable level of toxicity in the blood. Too little and the drug will either have no effect or its effect may not be noticeable. We generally call that an agonist.
We train approximately 200 volunteers each year to technician level using our own internal national diploma program, and we provide resources like this either electronically via the internet, or we'll send them a CD or a tablet if we have to.
And although it's been reported to occur with penetrating trauma, that's also relatively unusual. What happens is that there's a hole in the lung, and during breathing, air progressively collects in the pleural space. And because air is progressively collecting in the pleural space, positive pressure builds up within the thoracic cavity. That positive pressure then reduces venous return to the heart. The more formal way of determining the fourth intercostal space is to go to the sternomanubrial junction, otherwise known as the angle of Louis. Find the angle of Louis, which in Scotty is right here. Come immediately lateral to that. So in Scotty that's here, and that's going to be the second intercostal space. Then count your way down, second, third, fourth. That's Scotty's fourth intercostal space. And then if I follow that round, I will find the fourth intercostal space.
So this is our medical director?
In the mid-axillary line. Noting that in most people...
This is the
so
only way we could
Scotty,
get an instruction from our
higher
medical
than
director
so now we're going
directly to all of
demonstrate
our
on the mannequin.
ICPs.
We're going
So it's
to
a
need
really good
an
mechanism.
alcohol swab, a scalpel blade, a Turkle needle, and on approximately a 45-degree angle, insert the needle into the chest through the scalpel incision, watching the cannula colour go from green to red to green. The moment you're green again, we know we're in the pleural space. At that point, feed off the cannula to the hilt and remove the trocar, displacing it into a Sharps container.
If you want to review a previous incident from the MDT, select Job History from the top menu to bring up a list for you to select from. Status Log provides you with the times for the incident. The Tools menu also offers some other features. Pushing Local Area notifies control and changes your status to a local area.
So clearly we can't go out and roll cars at every single ambulance station in New Zealand to get the fire service along to cut it up. So we do things like a single simulation with them where we can then deliver key messaging to all of our staff and get this messaging out in a consistent way, which is really good. We laugh, but it's the reality. Just a re-image we did with on some work with AUT.
Kia ora and welcome to Clinical Matters. The following is a reenactment of an incident that occurred in an evening in late 2012. Shortly after clearing from the hospital, the crew were dispatched to an orange call for a patient with abdominal pain.
It was our second day shift and we'd been thrashed all day. We were quite tired and we'd had several missed meal breaks as well. We were just looking forward to finishing the day on time.
The information on the MDT stated that they were responding to a 1-alpha-1 abdominal pain without priority symptoms. The crew grabbed equipment they considered necessary and proceeded to the patient's front door. The patient explained he had previously called Healthline about his abdominal complaints and that they had advised him to call for an ambulance. They determined that it was most likely the patient had gastroenteritis after eating unsafe chicken. An autopsy revealed the patient had died of a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm. St John were notified and began an internal fact-finding investigation to determine whether things could have been done differently and whether any lessons could be learned. At a minimum, the crew should have established the patient's pulse, blood pressure and respiratory rate. And that's Clinical Matters. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you next time. Ka kitea.
Sam. Oh, you look upset. Is everything okay?
Oh, hey Rachel. This morning my teacher collapsed at school and was just lying there on the floor. She's okay now, but what should I do if it happens again?
Wow, I'm glad to hear she's okay. There are 6 important steps to help you remember what to do. D is for danger, R is response, send for help.
So that wee section there where we misdiagnosed a AAA and the patient went on to die, that's something which is very confronting. It's very confronting for our staff. Obviously, we encourage our staff to report and then we learn from that. And when we identify a system failure or a failure in our protocols, then we look to educate our staff on it. So whilst, to some extent you might say you don't want to, air your dirty laundry, as it were, it's very, very important in terms of improving patient outcomes and certainly in terms of keeping our patients safe. Other things we do, so we've got a range of online learning activities. So we've got over 100 of these. Last year there was only over 40,000 individual completions. We've got a great big bank now of illustrations and things which we can use and recycle. I'm sure much like many ambulance services do now. We try and deliver messaging in a fun way. So one of the things we challenge our team with is to come up with cartoons that don't offend anyone, that enable us to put them as part of a publication and engage people. And then we've got our CPG app, which we recognise has been adopted by a number of Australian ambulance services now, and variations on a theme. Just a wee summary of what it looks like right now. So this is an application that initially we were going to use for educating our staff on the CPGs, and then it became apparent that it's a very useful aid for when you're treating a patient. So it's got all of our guidelines and procedures in there. You're able to search things on it. You are able to view the guideline like you can, like you could the book. The book. One of the things that we've noted is a big reduction in medicine errors, because now we have a medicine calculator, enables you to put in the patient's weight, the clinical circumstance, the drug that you want to give and the route, and it will give you the drug dose and the preparation. If you forget the pharmacology, maybe you forget some of its interactions, all that's there for you. We also have checklists. So checklists for high risk and common procedures. So we go through and we encourage our staff, if it's good enough for pilots, it's good enough for our staff for uncommon procedures to go through and tick things off. This is something you see actively used out on the road, which is great. And then we've got a number of other funky features. So we've got key phone numbers so that our personnel can be prompted at certain points to ring the clinical desk or our air desk or our control room. We have a wiki search function. So you would have heard last night when we lost to AV that we created a clinical wiki, and that's accessible off our app. So it enables our people to search things, and we have information in there submitted by our own staff which is relevant to a New Zealand context. We also have podcasts, so the podcasts I discussed earlier. So one of the things that we're conscious of as we move towards professional registration, and in the modern world, is having short, bite-sized pieces of learning which are easy for people to access, easy for people to watch, and things that they can access when they're stuck at a safe forward point or whatever. So we're starting to build up a bank of those now. We also have safety alerts and updates which are available on the app, and we have a feature on here where we're able to push notifications out to all of our personnel who have the app should we find something. We've never done it, but we know it works. But if there was something that was really significant, then for example, we found out a batch of medication we had was poisonous, that would be something that we'd want to get the information out on that immediately, and we're able to push notifications out to our team, which is really, really cool. So that's how it looks at the moment. So obviously we launched that in 2013. We were very grateful to get a CAA award for that at the time. And over the last couple of years we've had extensive feedback from our staff. And we've obviously changed our CPGs like most services have. And now we're looking at a new updated version of the app which goes live this week. And it's something which will be used by both St John and Wellington Free Ambulance. So our Wellington Free colleagues are adopting this as well. So this is the next generation of the app. So it's specific to the patient and the officer. So we'll enter your weight, we'll enter the officer's practice level, and then everything that they see in the app from that point on will be relevant to that patient's weight. So the sizing of the airways, the amount of drugs that we give, the procedures that you can access, and everything will be specific to that practice level. So if you're a paramedic and you can't crike and part of the procedure is to crike, that will be greyed out. So you can see down there, down the bottom, that this patient's 30 kgs, and let's say they're agitated. Well, we don't have a procedure where you can actively sedate a 30 kg person, child, without talking to someone, so therefore we prompt you to call the clinical desk. We then change your weight to 90 kgs and you get access to our clinical procedure and guideline. So this is a flow chart, so essentially this is like a clinical decision-making tool to aid people at the scene. As an intensive care paramedic in St John, New Zealand now, I have access to over 30 medicines. It's really, really hard at 3 o'clock in the morning to remember all of those medicines, all of the doses, routes and the circumstances to which I can give it. So this is very, very handy, and it's something that myself and my colleague Chris, the sort of logic, are going to apply to our patient pathways very shortly. So this is pretty cool, something we're quite proud of. We've now got our contraindications in there too, so it's easily prompted on that. If there's any notes or considerations that are important from our medical directorate, we'll also have those in here as well. We have the medicine calculator, which we talked to earlier, so that just is the same but looks a little bit different. Really effective tool in terms of reducing clinical error. And one of the things which we've increasingly put in over the last couple of years to help us drive right care, understanding that we are asking personnel to increasingly manage people in the community, and we're asking them to make complex decisions using incomplete information and often circumstances that they're not familiar with. So for some of the more common high-risk stuff now, we've got red flags, orange flags and green flags to guide. You know, red flags is hospital, orange flags is see a doctor within 24 hours, green flags okay to leave at home. And all that is provided to you in the app, so it's a real clinical decision-making aid. So we've now got this is an idea flogged from the Aussies, so this is something that they put into one of the variations of the app that we've developed for them. And essentially what this is at a cardiac arrest it can be quite complex, especially at intensive care paramedic level, to know the size of your airways, to know the size of all the adjuncts that we use and know how many drugs to give, and now specific to different cardiac arrest scenarios, because cardiac arrest protocols are slightly different depending on the circumstance. All that information is provided for the team as well. So we've got this, and obviously, you know, in addition to that, we've got our podcasts, our safety alerts, the quick phone numbers, all that sort of stuff is still in there. So that's one thing. The other thing that we've been developing in light of professional registration is an electronic portfolio of evidence. Now, the vision for the electronic portfolio of evidence is that this is something which aids the individual clinical person to maintain and drive their own learning. So we're getting towards individual responsibility. So at the moment as an ambulance service, we're probably quite paternalistic in that we provide you education. We make the assumption we know what you need to learn. So we bring you into class right now and we talk at you essentially in order to deliver your learning. And we're looking to go towards a much more, a model alongside professional registration, which is a lot more clinically driven from the person themselves. So this portfolio of evidence, essentially, it's something we've been working on very quietly over the last couple of years, and it has a portfolio, a profile in it in much the same way that you would expect to see in a CV. So it has your clinical qualifications, it has your work experience, all that sort of stuff. It's partially populated out of our HR system, and it's partially populated from our LMS, and there's options for the person to input things themselves. It also has a dashboard, which I don't know if you can see very well there, but does things like it displays the most commonly used skills for you, the least used skills for you, etc. The other thing that we've built into it is the ability for the clinical support officers. So we've got 50 or 60 clinical support officers who work on the clinical desk. They work delivering education out there in the field. And so they'll have a variation of this app, so they can go in and check on that person, check their portfolio and provide feedback. Now, just to ensure no one gets picked on, it's very transparent. Anytime your line manager or clinical support officer opens the app, that's stamped and that can't be removed, so they've got to enter a reason and all that's auditable. And then to encourage staff to input stuff in reflective logs, which I'll talk to shortly, you're also able to anonymise it so the clinical support officer and line manager can't see it. So it can track your continuing learning, so we'll partially populate this, and you can also enter stuff yourself. So if you were Johnny Mulheron, you might take your presentation from the first day of the conference for the GRA, and you might enter it, make a clinical wiki article, in which case you'll get some credit for CCE. So we are linking with our patient report form, so our electronic PRF, and we're going to download the last 3 months of clinical data onto your portfolio, so you'll get the anonymised clinical education view, and what that will enable you to do is go, I attended a 23-year-old who is status 1, which for us is critical, and I'd like to do a reflective log on it. So you'll just click the button to the right and you'll be able to reflect on that log. Also displays the skills that you've used over the past 12 months and the medicines that you've used. And the purpose behind that is so that we can aid you to come to the decision that, for example, if you haven't given atropine in the past 12 months, perhaps you should do some work on that. Reflective logs I've already talked to, so for our intensive care paramedics we'll require them to have 3 active logs, 2 for paramedics and 1 for our technicians. And the purpose of the reflective log is just so that you can go back and go, you know, is this a case where I did well, is this a case I did poorly, and certainly we expect this to be embedded within professional registration as a requirement moving forward. The other thing is, you know, we sort of said as a manager, as a clinical support officer, if I was going to do a performance review on someone, if someone was coming to apply for a job with me, what would I expect? And what I would expect is that they would bring me their portfolio, because if they're telling me that they're the best paramedic in that area and they should have that clinical support officer role, I expect to be able to review their portfolio. I want to see what they've been doing a lot of. I want to see what they've been doing a little of. And then the stuff they haven't been doing much of, I want to know what they're doing about it, because that is the world that we live in terms of paramedicine now and taking individual responsibility. I can also see their reflective logs. I can see how many hours they've done on frontline ambulance. I can see how many incidents they've attended, and all this is enabled by the back-end reporting out of electronic portfolio, electronic patient report form, which is very, very cool. The other thing, you know, touching on what I mentioned earlier around bite-sized accessible learning, is we've, in the back end of this, essentially tried to replicate, you know, the principles of YouTube, and that we've got something attached to it where we can upload bite-sized pieces of learning, be it an online learning activity, be it a video, be it a document for people to read, and then they might watch that for 10 minutes. Hopefully they can do it predominantly during work time, which helps them out as well, and then that'll be stamped within their portfolio so we can see that and they can see that. And providing they've got a smart device and access to the internet, which in New Zealand most people do, then this will work very well for them. So that's a very quick snapshot of what we're doing in terms of learning media. So I guess a bit of the old, a bit of the new, and hopefully that sparks some interest and discussion around maybe what other services are doing as well. Thank you very much.